So, we talked about love languages my first week, and then we skipped a week when I was away, and I know that Tom did a great job because we adore him and love him, and you all love him. But I talked about the idea of love languages when we first began the sermon series. This is the one that will lead us into Lent. And we reminded ourselves that language is cultural and contextual, right? Language is really, really important. But it also is nuanced, right? You don't really understand that until you learn another language. So raise your hand if you've learned another language of some degree. Like I kind of did. My nieces are fluent, by the way, in Spanish. They did immersion growing up, so it's amazing. But if you learn another language, you understand that like you have the meaning of a word, but then you have the meaning of a word. You know what I mean? Like there's a difference to that, right? It's contextual. Language, words, meaning is all contextual. And so I sort of had a funny experience where I was going to LA, and my friend, who's never lived anywhere else but LA, she said, "You're going to want to bring a jacket. It's going to be 50s at night." That's adorable, right? And there's this content creator I follow who is like me from California living in Chicago, and he's like, "It's the weirdest thing. 35 degrees in Chicago is break out the sunblock, go out on a walk, right? And 35 degrees in California is calling 911. What is going on? What is happening? The world is, not how it should be." And so it's a reminder that you can't, you say 35 degrees or 52 degrees, right? There's context. We sort of laugh at that being cold, especially in this winter that we've had. But other places see that as very cold, right? Context brings nuanced meaning. Because you can't simply parse words out, Google words, and find out what they mean. Because all of language and communication, both from the ancient world and today, has context. We saw context last Sunday. I watched the Super Bowl with my nieces and their family and way too much food. Who did that? Who had way too much food, right? And we watched the Super Bowl, right? One of the jokes at the Josh Johnson comedy show last night, which was a sermon, by the way, in downtown Chicago, was it was interesting to see Bad Bunny at the end of the halftime show bringing a football more yards than the Patriots had the whole first half. I was like, you go, Josh Johnson. You're my people. But at the end of that, of course, Bad Bunny said what? Said, "God bless America," right? And we've heard that phrase. I feel like we've heard that phrase a little too much maybe from politicians for my liking, but that phrase has different meanings depending on who says it, right? Don't you understand that sort of nuanced? When a politician who leans into maybe policies that are exclusionary, right, that maybe are based on the thing we're calling kind of white supremacy or anti-immigration, right? When someone like that says, "God bless America," what do you think? What do you mean, right? Like, you hear it. But then you hear Bad Bunny say, "God bless America," and he's surrounded by what? Flags from the what? Americas, right? Because like it's North America and Central America and South America. We get that, right? Like he says, "God bless America," and he's surrounded by all of these flags. And so don't you think that language feels a little different, right? Meaningful messages are often strange to those without imagination and the openness to hear and listen to them. And so when you ended with "God bless America," it felt very different to me than when, say, like Pete Hegseth says it, right? Like it's just a very different sort of meaning. 3 words, same words, different meaning. Recently, you may or may not have heard about 6-7. 6-7, I'm doing it this way, right? And just so you know, when I'm saying it, it's over. It's over, it's not a thing anymore. One of my favorite kind of new sketches on Saturday Night Live is Colin Jost, who's an older white man, if you don't know, and he does the news and he leads SNL. And when a young person gets up on the news and does a little segment and says this word, and the minute Colin says it, it's like, dun, 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 like it's done, it's over. They're R.I.P. that word. So if I'm saying 6-7, R.I.P., it is over. But does anyone know what 6-7 means? 6-7 means? What? Nothing. Means nothing. It means nothing, right? Again, like if I'm saying it, it's way over. But the best I can tell, because I did look this up, it meandered into what I call the teen zeitgeist, originally from a rap song, and then it became sort of a basketball thing because, of course, basketball players can be how tall? 6'7", right? That's a short basketball player probably, huh? Then it leapt quickly into sort of random means, beginning with middle school boys. All the things that come and become crazy and beautiful and wonderful always start with middle school kids, right? And every time I see a gaggle of middle school girls coming into anywhere and they're loud, I'm never annoyed because that was me. Like, I know that was me. Like, they need to find meaning. So two sort of rather unrelated numbers became a whole thing that spread around social media, the interwebs as I call them. But really, if you look it up, it really means nothing. It's nonsensical is actually in the definition. But it was kind of fun for a little while for a small group of people, right? I think it had some deeper meaning, right? First of all, it does what teenagers try to do best, which is confuse adults. Like, teenagers' job in many ways, and I'm not resentful of it because I did it too, is to confuse us. Like, if we're confused, they're a little amused, right? They're a little like, haha, I'm saying this thing, right? It's to be funny, right? And honestly, again, I think a teenager's or tweenager's job is to sort of confound us as adults, to kind of do their own things, have inside jokes that older folks don't get. We aren't cool, and luckily for anyone, I'm not really trying to be cool, right? It doesn't bother me when I don't understand things, but I'm always curious. But I think what 6-7 became was a little bit of a mini sermon. It became something more meaningful for a little while. It was a way for kids living in the same world that we are of trauma and chaos, right? A way for them to find connection and belonging bigger than themselves. Because when they said 6-7, and we didn't get it, someone else got it, and they connected. They were like, I see you, you get it, I get it. It became something bigger because language may not even have a sensical meaning, but it connects us deeply and reminds us that things are bigger than us. Sometimes something seems to mean nothing to some, but for someone else, it means everything, right? And we know this anytime we encounter something that we don't understand, maybe that others find really important, right? You've stepped on that, right? You said something and it didn't mean a whole lot to you, and then they were like, oh, right? I found that when I went to England, right? When I was preaching in England, I had to be careful of certain words that I don't have to be careful of here, right? I think I've said this before that, I would say, oh, my pants, right? And does anyone know what that means in England? Underpants. That's not what I meant. So I gave this sermon where, like, my friend had his pants, hemmed and tailored, and they were like, wow, your friend is, like, super fancy. This is underwear tailored. I was like, that's not what I meant. So they say trousers, right? So meaning is different, and cultures have different language and different words. And I think we all need rituals to remind us, all need language to remind us that we're bigger than we think we are. We're in a bigger place. We're more connected than we think we are. These lines of connection give us identity, belonging, and purpose. And that remind us that we are not alone. So I think for a little while, 6-7 reminded kids all over the country and maybe even the world that they weren't alone. That they weren't alone. And it was a silly way to do it, but it's okay. And I think that's why words matter. Context matters. Scriptural stories that we read matters. And it's why, well, I'll say this, my seminary degree trumps your Google search. Because we had to learn context and clues and understanding, right? Truth, facts, all of these things are expressed through language, and we need to have a deeper context in order to understand something very complex and nuanced. And so we come to Psalm 99. Very well read by Dorothy, thank you so much. It's an enthronement psalm. It has all these big, bold claims, right? God is king, God is mighty, the Lord reigns, God saves us, right? And for Christians who are well accustomed to confessing either Christ is king or God is king, it may be easy to dismiss how astonishing and countercultural this psalm was. If we take a little time and we exercise our imagination, we can turn back the time and understand maybe where it was coming from. So imagine where this psalm and others were performed in the ancient world. So put yourself there. They were performed not in these big cathedrals, but they were often performed in modest little temples, right? in a smallish little mountain called Zion, in a tiny little kingdom called Judah, that was constantly being dominated by the great empires of the age. What are some of the great empires? Egypt, right? Babylon, right? Persia, Rome, right? Famous one when Jesus is around, right? Like, you understand that when Jesus was alive, he was under oppression, right? From a very strong, very powerful, very mighty kingdom, right? In that setting, in those settings, some little priest, some little poet, or little prophet struck up the courage to announce that God, their God, was the king of the entire earth, and all of the heavens must bow down, right? And therefore the people should tremble because he's exalted over all the people. And I think we hear that and we go, of course, because we understand that, we sing that, and we read that, and we get it, and we have theology on it. But think about back then, you know? That's like a little tiny person who isn't doing, it's like the Jamaica bobsled team, although they did win, right? Like coming in to the, the Winter Olympics and saying, we are the best, It's the little guy that's saying this thing about their God, their particular kingdom, their particular lives, their particular situations. So Judah was kind of an annoying little kingdom for most people. And you can read all about it in 1st and 2nd Kings. I know you're going to go home and do your homework. The triumphs and failures of the Israelites, the oppression they faced from surrounding empires full of aggression, money, power, and military might, things that they didn't have. And instead of thinking of themselves as victims or going boo-hoo, they decided to claim victory. You want to see a real king, they're saying? How is our king different? And what does a king do? What does a king value? Does a king value crushing the lowly, as some kingdoms around them did, or oppressing others, as others' kingdoms showed? Or do kings love abusing power? Do they love decimating foreigners? Do they love abuse? What kind of king is it? And they are simply saying, no, our king loves justice. The Hebrew word is mishpat. It means to govern and to judge and to execute justice across the board. No, our king, I don't know what your king is like, they're saying, but our king loves equality, equity. The Hebrew noun is meshar. It means provide evenness and fairness and prosperity for everyone. So when they say Yahweh is king, they're saying Yahweh is king in a way that other kings are not. He doesn't lead with brutality but benevolence. He doesn't rule with viciousness but with virtuousness. He doesn't allow for corruption but instead requires accountability. Sometimes when we sing Jesus is King or Jesus is Lord, I think a lot of times progressive people get a little hackled, right? We get a little hackled to something, and that's totally okay that we get hackled by it, right? Because we need to stop and think what they mean. And I'm someone who thinks we need to reclaim some of these words, right? There's words that have been used and given over, like evangelism, right? Sometimes I'll say evangelism, and if I say the word evangelism, what do you hear? Some of you hear, weird people coming to my door or telling me I'm wrong or telling me I'm going where? To hell. I'm going down there, right? But what does evangelism mean? Share the good news. Right? Share. Just because someone said evangelism and shared bad news doesn't mean they get that word. It means sharing good news. And that's why you'll hear me say things that reclaim things. Because I don't think we should just give over language and meaning, right? So when we say Jesus is king, what do we mean? And sadly, I think for some, Jesus is king has meant that he rules with an iron fist, like some mean character from Game of Thrones, right? You kind of get that sense of, we've had some interesting kings, right, represented in pop culture. Somehow we bow and pledge to loyalty, and we don't question anything, and God becomes mean and vindictive and oppressive, right? And I think too many folks with Christ as King in their bios on social media seem to be reveling in a little bit of cruelty these days. God, for too many who call themselves Christians, is sort of humorless and heartless and petty and corrupt and horrible and violent. It has been revealed to us over these last few weeks that the world is not led, whether it's corporations or countries by the world's best people. Can we at least all agree on that? Can we at least agree on that, right? We're finding out some things we wish we didn't know. Bad people, evil people. And so our language for Jesus or God and the work of the Spirit of God, I think, has oftentimes been conflated with that kind of leadership, whether we know it or not, right? Victimizing, abuse, misuse. And honestly, these days, if a social media account has Jesus as king in it, I sometimes am not sure what to think, right? I feel like that person may not like the Super Bowl halftime show, right? That they may get mad at, drag queens rather than actual injustice, right? They see God as one who dominates and controls, and they, of course, never them, right? God is controlling that other person, right? And it becomes more about defending religion than about defending human beings. And when they think of a king, I think they see a flag that's flown on a war horse that will trample over all of their perceived enemies underfoot. And when we get towards the end of Lent, you will see that Jesus participates not with a war horse, but with a donkey. For them, Jesus is a mascot. But for us, we need to think about something different. Jesus didn't die for brutal ideas of God. Jesus didn't defend himself or the idea of himself, or wear any crown but one of what? Thorns, right? Jesus didn't defend himself or God. Jesus defended people. People, right? People were the entire point. Sure, some say Jesus is king, and it's awkwardly and sometimes disturbingly wrong, the way they view Jesus as king. But I think we can reclaim that. And when we say it, we can say it with kind of a wink, right? And a prayer, right? Like how Bad Bunny says, God bless America. We can say it, we know we mean something a little different. Like 6-7, right? Like something that unites us, that draws us together. We can't let bad faith folks steal our language and disrespect the meaning of it. So when we say God is king, we mean goodness is king, right? We say God is in charge. We mean love of neighbor is in charge, right? Saying it with the understanding of that context, saying it with the understanding of an underdog sort of context, it can amuse us and confound others. Maybe that's part of our job. When we say Yahweh reigns or Jesus is king, we mean a different kind of reign and a different kind of king, because the Bible tells us so. It's a very simple answer as to why that is. Wherever the underdog is flying a premeditated victory flag of joy, that is where the intersection of our language and understanding comes. God reigns, Jesus is king, but in what way? What kind of rule and reign and kingship? One who reigns with fairness and equity, the text says. One who leads with love and goodness, the text says. One who puts people over power, the psalm says. One that is generous and not greedy. The king that we serve and sing about and say and speak and live into, the kingship that we love and think about, the king that oversees us in our faith is one whose love language is justice. May it be so. Amen.